All right. Good. Okay. Welcome back to Menstrual Memoirs with Dr. Madalyn Turner. I'm excited and grateful, as always, that you guys are tuning in. And I am super excited today because this is the first Menstrual Memoirs podcast episode with a guest. So I can't wait to introduce you to her and let her talk a little bit about what she does. And then we're going to get into some really, really good information. And she is coming to you from Australia, correct? So we're on completely different time zones, but we're making it work. It's a lot of fun. So I have Freya here, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you, and then we'll get started.
Oh, thank you so much, Madalyn. It's a pleasure to be your first guest. How exciting. I'm coming out to you from Western Australia, and I am a Yoni mapping therapist and holistic sex coach. So those are two things a lot of people might not have heard of. So just to give you a brief rundown, a Yoni mapping therapist is someone who works with a modality that includes talk therapy and sex education. So like a kind of talky component, and then also body work. So I do a unique kind of body work that involves vaginal massage. So Yoni mapping therapy is quite holistic in that sense because it's working with like the mind, and we do a lot of chatting about their sexual history and the struggles that they might be having at the time, and also some home play practices and things that might help them to take home and sort of work into their day-to-day. And then we also do full body massage. I do breast massage, abdominal massage, pelvic massage, and then external vulva massage and internal vaginal massage and mapping. Okay. So it's pretty unique, and it's just gorgeous because I feel like you're working on many levels with the woman, and we can just cover so much ground that way. So, you know, the internal work can be for trauma release or tension release. It can be for preparing the pelvic floor for birth or rehabilitating after birth, scar tissue remediation, things like releasing shame and guilt and stigma from that space in the body and the emotional and energetic body. It can also be for helping to sensitize and teach that place in the body and that brain, create a brain-body connection to increase pleasure and sensation. Anyway, I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent, but a lot of people are like, okay, that's cool, Yoni mapping. Why do you need to go inside the vagina though? So I just wanted to give you a little brief idea of a few reasons why that can be really beneficial. And holistic sex coaching is pretty self-explanatory, but basically I do sex coaching and education with both men and women. And I recognize it as a really holistic thing that needs a holistic approach, because you can't just try to fix like one thing and give them a sex move or a technique and expect everything just to transform. So I'm kind of helping people level up their sex lives, coming at it from all angles, and I just love it. I fucking love it. It's a really amazing career path that I never thought I would take. But yeah, I think I've found my calling with that. So that's what I do these days.
Awesome. How did you fall into this work?
Well, I guess through my own personal development, and it was a bit of a, one of those stories of turning your greatest fear or weakness into your biggest strength or passion, because I had enormous amounts of shame and trauma, and I was just completely shut down when it came to sexuality, and I was just terrified. At one point I thought I was asexual. Another point I just thought, look, like it's just not for me. It's too hard basket. It's, terrifying. I had so many really scathing inner beliefs around my own body and my sexual identity. I was just, in the pits basically. And it wasn't something that I found easy or pleasurable or, accessible, like a healthy, robust sex life where I felt good about myself and empowered in my body and confident. Like that was something I never thought I would have. And I'd pretty much resigned myself to just being that way and not tackling it. And, having partners who just ended up having to suck it up or leave because we wouldn't have sex. And if we did, it was like, don't touch me there, don't touch me there. I'm going to keep my bra on. We're going to have the lights off. Don't touch me there. I'm not going to do that to you. Cocks are scary and disgusting. Vaginas are scary and disgusting. Like I was just, it was a mess. And so when I started working on myself through a few personal development trainings and workshops, that was more around mindset and I suppose like finding my potential and believing that I could go after my dreams, all of that kind of cliche stuff, but very powerful when you haven't done any personal development. I started getting really fascinated and passionate about tackling my fears and all of these kind of traumas and conditioning that I held and that were limiting me. And eventually I was like, okay, I think sex has to be next. Like this is the last frontier. I've kind of released all these other limiting beliefs and I've quit my job and started a business and I'm like really backing myself now. But like sexuality is still, a pretty foundational part of being human and thriving. And I just had to jump in. So I started with some Tantra workshops and sacred sexuality. And kind of just meandered my way through, trainings and retreats, and then started doing some practitioner trainings, eventually found Yoni mapping therapy. But as I went, I covered so much ground. I made so much progress. I released so much shit that wasn't serving me and that was holding me back. And I transformed my relationship with my body. I had so much more confidence and comfortability in my body and my sexual expression. And it was a fucking hard, like it was a few years of doing the work and putting myself like way out of my comfort zone and like practically rocking back and forth in tears because I was so terrified at certain workshops, like I was really pushing my edge. But within like a safe, boundary. And I was just like, whoa, this has just been a huge game changer for me. And all of a sudden I was just like, well, fuck, if I can do this, then other people can do it. And I'm in a unique position to help them because I've just kind of been through that. And so I started training and starting to work in the space.
That's awesome and incredible. I feel like a lot of people's stories, you heal yourself and then you help the others on their healing journey, right? And I think this work is so needed, which is why you're here and why we were talking about it. So thank you for doing the work, because I'm sure it was not easy. But it's always awesome. Every time I talk about like healing or doing the work on the healing journey, it's always worth it. And it's always a journey. I like to remind everybody it never fully ends.
Yeah, no, it definitely never ends. And it's not linear, sometimes I'm like moving forward, making progress, and then sometimes I'm like off to the side or taking a step back. And it's, it's a practice.
Yes, that's a good point to hit home as well, because it is not linear. It is ebbs and flows like all things in life. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
So I want to talk today about some of the stuff you do with like Yoni mapping and sex therapy. So the first one I think we're going to start with is talking a little bit about how emotions or trauma are stored in your body. This is huge. This is huge, especially for, I think, women in general, and storing it like in their pelvic floor region too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just talked to like my own chiropractic patients about this. A lot of times they're like, I don't understand like X, Y, and Z. And when I mention this one, I know it's a lot harder for people to wrap their head around, or even with like menstrual coaching. Sometimes we see menstrual issues pop up because of trauma, and it gets stored, and our bodies adapt and work with it there and keep us alive. But that doesn't mean there's not some sort of like dysfunction or dis-ease that pops up with that. So tell me a little bit about like what you've noticed working with your women and or patients and stuff.
Yeah. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because it's somewhat tricky to pin down or prove in a really clear-cut scientific way, but there is so much more research coming out now around how the body does store trauma and memories as well in the tissues. And there's an incredible book called The Body Keeps the Score. There's a really great documentary that's come out recently, Gabor Mate. He's incredible. So there is a lot of info about it out now, but I feel like it's still quite a recent thing for people to grasp. And so people can be a bit skeptical, and even I was a bit skeptical as well. You know, if I used to be very like, oh, it's a bit woo-woo, that's a little bit esoteric. Where's the tangible proof? But I honestly see this in my work all the time, because I'm doing like a combination of the psychological stuff and the talky stuff as well as the body work. It's really interesting because when trauma is stored in the body, it's, you know, usually because the nervous system has gone into overload during a traumatic experience, and it kind of, you know, locks stuff into the body when it can't finish processing that experience or that emotional information. And the cool thing about trauma work or trauma-informed work is if this person has to have like the inner resources and tools and safety that they didn't have back when, you know, the experience happened and it was too much for them to handle. So the emotion just got trapped in the body, nervous system freaked out, locked down, freeze. So now, you know, it's usually, I don't work with people who are in active trauma or have a really recent trauma. And I definitely am not a trauma expert. I'm just trauma informed. So I'll make sure people are seeing a therapist who's really specialized as well, in combination with my work, if they do have like a recent trauma. But basically, when a woman does come to me, she's usually done a little bit of work and there's been a little bit of time that's passed since the event or events. And it means that she has the inner resources and self-awareness and potentially the bandwidth and capacity to tackle that trauma and process it and integrate it more than back when it happened and the shock was really present. So, you know, you need to have the inner resources that you didn't have. You also need to have somewhere that you feel really safe and comfortable where that space is being held. So that's kind of how that's what I do as well. And you need to have somewhere for that traumatic energy to actually go. So while we're doing the full body massage, that's relaxing the body, it's calming the nervous system, it's really dropping this person into a safe space where there's less tension, less tightness and contraction in the body, more relaxation. We're like literally, through massaging out tension, literally creating more space for the energy to like diffuse. And the other thing is, you know, it helps if you are drawing attention and connecting to the body part where the trauma is being stored. So a lot of shit gets stored in the vagina and tucked away down there, especially sexual traumas, or even, you know, micro traumas as they're called, which might even just be, you know, when you're in high school, some nasty teenage boy teased you for having, I don't know, a hairy pussy or a smelly pussy, or even just having body hair or small boobs. Like, God, you know, kids are cruel. I got all of it. And those internalized beliefs around yourself being disgusting or repulsive or not sexy or whatever, you know, that can amount to trauma and shame and emotional information that we tuck away and that we wind up carrying around. So inside the yoni, there's often quite a lot of memories or emotions that are being stored to protect us. And as we're working, we're releasing tension internally. With the physical massage, we're holding space in a really safe way that the woman feels comfortable. We've spent, 2 hours together chatting and massaging. And by that point, she's kind of in a place where she feels comfortable with me, or we just don't move forward. conscious touch, we're helping the brain connect back to the yoni and to the places that we're working with, because often they go numb and it turns into a bit of a dead zone where the brain's just like, that doesn't exist. That's so full of fucking trauma and pain. Like, that's too hard. I'm not gonna like communicate with that part of the body anymore, which is, you know, why so many people will have trouble orgasming or not have a lot of sensation internally. They might feel numbness. They might feel like a massive disconnection. So just to like wrap up that, sorry, I can talk a lot about stuff. Yeah, we're reconnecting to the part of the body that has been associated with the trauma or has been holding it. So it's kind of a whole process, but I love the modality that I work with because it's combining all of those elements and creating like the perfect conditions for the trauma or the emotional information to actually like arise and surface and be felt and processed and then expressed and like released, you know, through sound, through breath, through it might actually like present as the woman getting like really trembly or shaky or hot flushes, or she might just have a real urge to burst into tears or get angry or laugh, or, you know, she'll have an actual memory surface to her awareness or an emotion that will just be so strong. So that's all an indication to me that the body is like, okay, like I'm finally in a safe space with the resources to allow this to surface again, to feel it. And then I'm going to like express it and release it. Yeah. So I'm kind of like facilitating that release process and creating a safe space for her to do that. And I've seen so many amazing, like, just crazy shit happens, you know, like it's pretty undeniable to me after doing this for 5 years, working one-on-one with people, that trauma and memory and emotion is totally stored in the body. And I see it come up and rise, you know, like the things that I've witnessed in clients are quite remarkable. And so I don't have any doubt that that's the case. And it's just really cool to have the privilege and the honor to hold space for someone and help them like go through that completion process and then integrate it, you know, and then move forward without having that inside them anymore. Yeah.
And clears a lot out of the way. I haven't done like work like what you're doing, but just work with like other women in different ways, or like working with my own people. And I mean, I can just like contest to that for sure. Like, I think like, well, everyone has trauma. I think sometimes we can get a little confused that, well, maybe my trauma is not as significant as someone else's, but it's your experience. So trauma is trauma to the person, you know, and energy just has to go somewhere. So, but giving it the opportunity to be processed correctly so you can release it and let it go, I think is huge. And so much safe space is needed for that. You have to feel comfortable. You have to be with somebody who can hold that space for you. And I think everyone deserves that, you know. That's amazing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Everyone has their own kind of unique like dollop of trauma, and it might not be something as obvious as rape or sexual abuse or a physical trauma. It might just be a whole lot of, you know, emotional trauma that happened through an abusive relationship, like emotionally abusive, not physically. So it's not obvious from the outside, but yeah. And, you know, like I said, with people just making disparaging remarks about your body or your sexuality, or when you first discover that you can touch yourself and it feels good when you're like 4 years old and your parents are like, oh, don't do that, that's dirty, don't touch that. It's like, boom, there you go. Now you've got that. You're gonna that's gonna affect you.
Oh yeah. So, and then just society in general still having these like preconceived notions of what a woman should be doing or not doing, or what's too much or what's not enough, and should they be and you're just like, fuck, like it's a lot, you know.
I know, we're really up against it. It's not just our lifetime of trauma, it's like our, you know, inherited trauma, and then culturally just far out, like yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, but if anyone listening is doing the work, kudos, because like you said, it is intergenerational. And by you doing the work now, not only are you helping yourself, but of course it's going to go back and help, and it's going to progress forward. So this is how we heal, and we start to create better environments. So if we have daughters or anything like that, they don't have to necessarily experience the same things we do. We make a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
I want to talk next. You had mentioned it. I think this is huge for probably more than we realize, like talking about, well, just like teenage years and like learning your menstrual cycle or what's happening and where is the mark being missed on this? Because like right before I hopped on here, I was on Instagram a little bit ago and somebody else was posting it. I think it was maybe somewhere in Australia as well, saying how they did this like study, and they were saying how teenagers are not getting proper education on their menstrual cycle and what it does and what it influences. And the teenage years are so important to your overall like menstrual health, especially when it comes to conception and menopause later. So there needs to be more talking about it and real education. And I totally agree with this. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. There is just so much left out of it. So I would love to kind of hear where you want to start with this. Like what is the top things you think should be in there? What do you think we're missing?
Oh my gosh, what a huge topic, hey? But yeah, also something I'm so passionate about, because if we were getting the proper sex education and menstrual education when we were teenagers, like I wouldn't be in business, you know, like if you kind of, you know, lay those foundations in a really healthy, beautiful way, you don't wind up being an adult that needs to come have a session with someone like me, because, you know, you'd have the confidence, the self-esteem, the boundaries, the self-worth, the kind of appreciation and reverence for your feminine. Like, you know, you'd probably love being a woman, whereas I definitely know I did, and a lot of people that I know, like, kind of resented being a woman when we were teenagers. We had to get a period, and it was all very like yucky and hush hush, and there was just like no reverence, no respect for the feminine or womanhood. It was an inconvenience, and it was like, oh, fuck this, like boys don't have to do this, and like it was embarrassing and shameful. So I feel like one thing that I love the idea of is for a parent to like throw a period party for their daughter, and kind of in the build up be like preparing her, chatting about menstruation, showing, you know, the mother can show her when she gets a bleed and kind of walk her through this stuff and really normalize it way before it happens, so that she's prepared and she's excited, you know, like make it something that's really exciting and like this gorgeous milestone that everyone's really proud and pumped for her about, and then have a party and like celebrate it and talk about it openly in the family, and like invite some friends. Like if you've got a bit of a community around you of other parents that are, you know, quite sex positive and body positive, then make it a thing. Like let's normalize it and just strip back all of the shame, all of the taboo and the stigma right from the get-go, and just, yeah, like imagine what a difference that would make. Even just the attitude that we had and the way we spoke about it, and the fact that we spoke about it, not like, oh, hush hush. So that's like the first thing. And obviously just a good education around it, like that uses positive language and like really prepares them for the realities of it, and teaches them, you know, like diet and exercise need to come into it. Like if you're going to eat a heap of sugar and dairy before, like you're going to have more menstrual pain.
But you actually have control over those things by your choices.
Yeah,
like, you don't have to, of course, like in your early teenage years when you get your period, it is going to be regulating. So there is going to be so yes, but you can support your body completely differently than you've ever been taught. That would make your experience so much better. Versus like here, you're trying to regulate, you have crappy periods, you're probably eating shit food, because I live in America and the standard American diet is shit. All these things, and then they just put you on birth control, which doesn't fix it. And then your body stops regulating on its own.
I know. It's like, Yeah, that's the other thing. Like I would teach them about why hormonal birth control is not a go. And, you know, it would be so empowering as a teenager to like learn that you actually do have some control, and like you can like I'd get them tracking their period as well. Like, you know, and we would do it together. Like the mom and the daughters probably would end up syncing up eventually. And then, you know, you can track it together, you can compare notes, you can be like have little reflection times when you're bleeding and being like, oh, this was interesting. Like around ovulation, I was like absolutely crushing it at sport and school, and I was feeling really social. Or, you know, you can kind of just like really learn together, and that would just be so empowering for someone, especially, you know, a teenage girl who often feels like most things are pretty out of their control and they're at the whim of like this kind of yang masculine culture and the schooling system and everything like that. It's just so not designed for the feminine. But if you had a space in the home where like you can go into that feminine and like work in a more cyclical way, you know, you had parents that understood, like maybe the boys in the household would like cook the food while the women were bleeding, or like, you know, there's all these
I'm all about the boys learning this too, to totally change the conversation on this as well. Like, it shouldn't be shameful, and it shouldn't be something you're hiding because it makes a boy, or even as an adult, like a man, uncomfortable. You kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, no.
I know.
No.
I know.
Or that we're crazy because we go through it. I'm like, well, we need to change the narrative and education on that. If we understood that we are flowing and we're not the same every day, but we're trying to show up in this more masculine driven way, the same every day, because that's how our world is, maybe we wouldn't be considered as crazy if people understood the changes in the flow that's really happening, and we could honor that. Like, oh, she's not crazy. Her intuition's telling her probably maybe some boundaries are off, or there's something she needs to deal with, or maybe needs to like support her body a little bit better with food or whatever. But no, it's like giving you information.
Absolutely. I know, that's the thing, like teaching young girls to treat it like a vital sign, you know, like the book Fifth Vital Sign. So teaching them how to use it as a tool and a barometer for health and well-being, and then adjust accordingly, and normalizing that in the home. And I mean, ideally in the culture, but that's like a pretty big thing to tackle, but starting in the home, we can do that, you know?
I would love your opinion on as well. I was talking to somebody else about this one time. I think if we did educate girls better about their menstrual cycle, but also the reality of a fertile window and when conception can happen, you know, I think that you should give them more credit. I think that they would maybe make better choices than you think they would. But growing up, like when I had sex ed, it was basically like, don't have sex because you'll get pregnant. You know, there was no talk of like, I thought for the longest time, I'm like, tell people now, like, I'm a chiropractor, I have a doctorate, I'm a doctor. I didn't know for the longest time that you couldn't get pregnant every single day of the week until I started doing more of this work. And I was like, how is this like not a thing? And sometimes I had people still come at me on social media who are also educated, tell me like, no. And I'm like, no. It's science. Like, it's only a window. Now, granted, you need to understand how to track that, and that could be a little bit more challenging as a teenager, but to start to introduce them to that and give them that empowerment and talk with them about it so they can make better choices versus like, just when does it ever work to just tell somebody not to do something?
I know, especially a teenager with hormones coursing through their body. I know, like, and I reckon it would also be a huge motivator for that girl to you know, pay more attention to tracking, diet, like all of that, so that her period did like regulate more quickly, because, you know, it is a little bit dicey when it's first finding its balance. So it wouldn't be a super reliable method of like contraception. But the fact that like you even had the knowledge that you can't get pregnant all month long, it's really just like, you know, a like 6-day window. It's like, that would be so cool for starters. It would remove the fucking fear that we get, you know, like pumped into us as teenagers around like pregnancy. And like like I read something in a book recently, I can't remember who who it was, but they were like, yeah, I spoke to a doctor, and she was saying, oh, when you're young, you are literally so fertile, you could get pregnant from sitting on a warm bus seat. So like there's this, which is like obviously not true and an exaggeration.
Clearly,
But I do remember in high school feeling as though, you know, the general consensus was like, if you have sex, you will get pregnant.
right.
You have to use like 3 condoms. Like I was so terrified of getting pregnant that the first time I attempted to have sex with my boyfriend, been with him for a whole year, and we waited till our anniversary, and it was like, oh, and then I made him wear 2 condoms because I was so afraid of getting pregnant. And then it strangled his dick and he couldn't keep an erection, and it totally didn't work, and we didn't manage to have sex. But also like wearing 2 condoms is dangerous because that can break the condoms. And like that, I didn't know that, you know, like the education's just so lacking. So yeah, that would be really cool, empowering knowledge for a girl to have. And I'm sure it would motivate her to get in tune with her cycles and pay attention, so that eventually she was able to tell when she was fertile and when she wasn't, and do what she wants to do with that information.
Right. It gives them a whole nother option too, than just being like, here's a hormonal birth control pill. And I think, you know, to each your own, like choose what's the best choice for you by all means. But the fact that there's not really too much talk or other education about other methods out there to prevent pregnancy and when you can even get pregnant is hugely lacking.
Yeah.
Hugely.
Yeah.
Even as adults, like if you talk about tracking and fertile window and stuff, they're like, does that really work? Yeah.
Mistrust around it. People don't trust that. It sounds too like out there or too alternative or too hippie. Right. And they also probably don't trust themselves and their bodies, because we're so disconnected from our bodies and our cycles, that the concept of like being on the same team and being so in tune that you can actually tell is like to some people, you know?
Oh, I know. But it's really liberating, learning and empowering that information. So if you are listening, I highly recommend it.
Me too. It's a game changer.
It is, for sure. You just are a lot more connected to your body. And I think that's one thing too, when that article I was reading was talking about, there's just, we know more now than maybe we used to, but like your menstrual cycle is a 5th vital sign. So it gives you this outwardly information on what's going on internally in our bodies that we're able to use and access and make different choices off of. And it's our teenage years and in our 20 years, like that does influence when you're trying to conceive, if you're trying to conceive later in your 30s or 40s, and it hugely influences menopause. Hugely.
Yeah.
You know, and we haven't really talked about that. I feel like too much people just thought same thing, like you get your period and it sucks, and then you get menopause and it sucks, but then you're done. You're like, a lot of years in between that of sucking that it doesn't have to. None of them have to. Like, so
none of them have to, totally. Yeah, same with menopause.
Yeah, no,
I know.
It's all this like beautiful, I think, experience that we had to go through as women. Like there's a power and there's a magic within it. So I think if you learn more of this information, you can talk to people about it and find like support people within this realm, like your experience can be completely different. And there is a lot of like inner knowing, and I think just connecting more to yourself than you could ever imagine by actually using this.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had a thought pop into my head regarding like what I would want to instill in teenagers or teach them as well. And it's not exactly around the menstrual cycle, but it's around pleasure and sexuality and self-pleasuring, you know, like that's another thing you definitely don't get taught in sex ed is, I mean, you get taught like periods are painful, which is limiting, and it's going to probably make them more painful than if you believed that they aren't normally, they don't need to be. And then pleasure, like, you know, you also get taught like sex, you know, when you first have sex, it's going to be painful, and there's talk of pain, but there's never any talk of pleasure. And I remember being so baffled when I learned about, the like penis in vag concept, sex. I was like, why would anyone do that? That just like doesn't sound like fun. Because there was no talk of pleasure. And there definitely wasn't any talk of exploring your own body and self-touch, self-pleasure. So that's another thing that I'd probably chat about and encourage. I felt way too weird and ashamed to even touch my vulva throughout my whole teenage years. Like, I never masturbated right up until I think my early 20s. Didn't masturbate. Like, was just like, ew, gross, that's weird. Like, no desire to do it. So that's something else that I'd probably bring into the sex education, is a bit of like pleasure education and telling them what's possible. And I mean, that would also create adults that have probably more easily accessible pleasure. There probably wouldn't be as many people that struggled to orgasm or had like blockages around pleasure and shame and guilt around receiving pleasure. Sure. It would be a bit of a different terrain if we were all kind of taught that pleasure is our birthright and normal and healthy, and we are worthy of it and can access it. So yeah,
kind of release that shame and guilt that's been built around it. And you should, I think, before anyone else knows your body, like, you should be comfortable and know your body. And I know that with like a lot of postpartum moms, like, we really encourage that with them. We work pretty close with a pelvic floor physical therapist here. And, before you can ever go back to really having sex postpartum, your body's just changed and it's went through so much. Like, you have to relearn yourself before you probably even feel really comfortable letting your partner back into that space,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Let's talk more about yoni mapping therapy. Because when Freya messaged me, I was like, what is yoni mapping therapy? I have no idea. But she had to tell me. So let's talk about what it is, why it's important. What should we know?
Yeah, so it's a modality that I'm really proud to practice it, because in the space where there's, like genital massage or yoni massage involved, usually, because it's so unregulated and often more on the tantric or conscious community side of things, there's a lot of gray area. So it can be tricky to find a yoni massage practitioner who has enough training and is really in integrity and, has an approach that isn't too far. I mean, not like, for some people, like the really like spiritual approach is perfect. But I find that for the majority of women, and like, I'm kind of marketing myself to more of like the average woman in the mainstream, the tantric approach of all of the chakras and energy, and it's too woo-woo, it's alienating, and the language with it is often really alienating. And I kind of love yoni mapping because it's more kind of tangible and pragmatic, and it's definitely incorporating some tantric practices and aspects, and some really ancient stuff from Taoist traditions and things like that. But then it's also got stuff, influences from mind abdominal massage and Gestalt therapy, and just like, there's the woman who created the modality has a background in a whole lot of different things. And she decided, like, okay, there's just nothing that really exists that incorporates all those things in a holistic way, and that is regulated and like accredited as a legitimate modality. So I'm really grateful to her. Her name's Bonnie Bliss, and she got the modality registered with the IICT. So that's International Institute of Complementary Therapies. And so that means that we as practitioners are like registered and accredited. There's a code of ethics. There was like a really stringent training process. And there's only 27 of us that she trained in the modality. So in the whole world, there's only, I think, probably less than 25 now that are practicing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's a beautiful combination of influences and modalities that is very trustworthy and very grounded. So I've definitely heard from clients that they've had sessions with tantric practitioners and gone and got a yoni massage, and it's been really traumatic or really kind of, they've had very leaky, sort of creepy, sleazy energy, or they've used their power to, it's a very dicey, kind of shadowy space sometimes. Sometimes it's super magical and beautiful, and I did a lot of work with tantra and trainings in that before, so I'm not like, bad mouthing it, but I just really appreciate that now with yoni mapping therapy, I've got a modality that's super above board and I guess credible and legitimate in the eyes of like the governing bodies or whatever. And it's cool because like it's a 3-hour session, usually at least 3 hours. And the first hour or hour and a half, I'm having a pot of tea and I'm chatting with the woman, getting her history, seeing, where she's at with her sexuality and her body image and her confidence and her self-love and, her relationships and communication, where, everything relevant. Sure. Seeing where she's at and what's going to be the most helpful approach, and also giving her a whole lot of really amazing educational info and some tools so that she can go home and practice them and maybe learn how to self-pleasure and explore herself so that she can kind of increase her pleasure potential and take that into her relationships. And I mean, it's really broad what we can chat about and work on, and it depends on the client. But we start with talking, and that gains, a bit of rapport that starts to develop trust and help her feel more comfortable with me and in my presence, which is important before we move to touch, right? So then once we start with the body work, again, I'm still gaining trust and rapport with this body, and I'm introducing touch in a really safe way. So I make sure she knows I'm not going to touch her genitals without her permission or, before she's ready. So it may even not happen. If she's not feeling safe, we're not going to do it. Sure. It's just always going to be at her pace and within her control. Because I think in so many instances that we're touched on the vulva or something goes inside our vagina, it's quite disempowering and it's not usually in our control. So it might be medical, which can be disempowering and traumatic or just really clinical, or it's sexual. And that, is a whole different thing. And often there's something expected of us, we're expecting to give pleasure or to receive it. There might be pressure on us to, perform or feel pleasure or, and sex can be amazing as well, but it is a different thing. There's like two people's energy going back and forth. It's a totally different thing. So yoni mapping sits like in the center, and it's more therapeutic in nature and just supposed to be really nurturing and safe and informative and fascinating, like it's helping the woman create a bit of a map in her brain of that inner landscape by creating new neural pathways to the area, because there's all of these parts of the vagina internally that will probably never have been touched, never have been massaged, never have been focused on. And they're not going to have a lot of sensation at first because the brain doesn't even know they exist. Like those parts don't know they exist because there isn't neural pathways to them. So often a woman will find their clitoris and that's really accessible, really easy. They can get pleasure from that. It's like, awesome. But then their kind of sexuality centers around the clitoris, their masturbation centers around the clitoris. Like for, their partner's clitoris is really easy to find. So it's getting heaps of airtime, and the neural pathways to that area are becoming so deeply furrowed because they're being tread all the time. Mm-hmm. And then we get into this like habitual kind of place where we're reliant on that one pathway to feel pleasure. And so in the massage that I'm doing with the internal vaginal massage, we're sort of opening up potential for pleasure in other areas and waking up the other parts of the yoni by, starting to create a brain body connection and create some new neural pathways. but I'm getting ahead of myself. We do a body massage. That's for relaxing the whole body, making sure we honor the whole body, getting them into a place where their nervous system is kind of calm. And, they're in the parasympathetic and they feel calm, they feel relaxed and safe and comfortable to move towards Yoni touch. And then with their permission, I'll do the external Yoni massage. So just the vulva, and I'll be telling them like what I'm doing and, giving them a bit of a guided tour of the anatomy and telling them what, where I'm massaging and what I'm touching, checking in with them about what they're noticing or feeling, what physical sensation they're experiencing. Just getting into the habit of being really present with the physical sensation and observing the experience that they're having, so that they're not dissociating and rushing off into their head or just checking out completely, because this is a challenging area that can be triggering. We're just like getting them to be able to regulate themselves, and be really present with the body and stay in the body while it's all happening. So, just it's always a very gentle, easeful experience that's based in trust and safety, basically. And so, we do the external Yoni massage, we do the internal massage, which all the while is releasing tension on a physical level. But because, there's often emotion or memory that's being stored in the physical tissue, as we're releasing the tension, we're actually like releasing whatever's being held there as well. So it's kind of working on a few levels, like energetically and emotionally, we're creating a safe space to bring up the trauma and emotion and release it. Physically, we're releasing tension, because pretty much everyone has tension in their pelvic floor. And I just work with what comes up. So if there's, scar tissue, or if there's particular areas of tension and tightness, I also show them a bit about their pleasure anatomy. So I'll show them where their G spot is, their A spot. I'll touch upon their cervix, just introduce them to these areas, show them where they are, what they feel like. Usually do a bit of coaching around like how to find them themselves, and then how to work with those areas to teach them how to feel more pleasure. And every session is so different. It totally depends on the client, how that all goes. It might just be really educational and chill and safe. I mean, I don't know what word I meant to use. It's always safe, but it might just be kind of quite a calm experience. And other times it might be a bit more expressive or cathartic. There might be a lot of tears, there might be some big stuff that comes up that we work with, and it might be a more active session, but it's all really beneficial because, we're releasing tension and we're creating neural pathways no matter what. And the body, if given the opportunity, will be using that opportunity to release shit that doesn't serve it. So even if on a conscious level, you aren't aware of any like big stuff moving or shifting or releasing, it will be doing that on its own for you. So that's kind of the general flow of a session. And I love to work with people for a few sessions. One session's still amazing. I give them as much value and info to go on with as possible, because it's not always possible for someone to come and have more. But a few sessions can be great, because then we can kind of work deeper and go a bit more into specific things each time. That
was one of my questions I was going to ask you. And I'm guessing then you only see clients in person.
Well, for Yoni mapping, I do. There's not really, there's no way of being able to do that online. But I do, in my coaching as well, I do teach people to do a similar kind of Yoni massage or de-armoring work with themselves with a wand. So it's kind of possible to coach people and do it via Zoom. But for the Yoni mapping, that's very much an in-person thing. And then the coaching is like a different journey and a different thing that I offer.
Sure. That makes sense. Is there any, I want to talk maybe about maybe some common things that you see from women? So I think a lot of us kind of just feel like our problems are just our problems and no one else must experience the same things that we do. But I'm sure you can tell me that that's probably not true.
It's totally, yeah. And that's like another danger of sexuality being so taboo, because we don't talk about it enough. And so everyone is having these really similar or common experiences and feeling alone and feeling like there's something wrong with them or they're abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
But if we actually talked about it more openly, then everyone would be like, oh, you get that too? Like, oh wow. Like, so I do see a lot of common things. I hear a lot of common things in sessions. And one of the things I hear all the time is like, I feel like I'm the only one that, like, I feel like I'm not normal or I'm wrong, or, and so I'm always reassuring women like, oh my God, girl, you are so normal. It's, you're not alone in this experience. Like, I can usually relate to them myself as
Sure.
well. I'm like, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
So, really common ones is like people having a really challenging relationship with the way their yoni looks and their body altogether. But yeah, like really low body image and body confidence, and feeling as though their labia aren't normal, like the appearance of their labia, especially if they're a bit larger or more full. People can be so scathing about themselves. They can just be so harsh because of the way, like the media and porn portray labia. And then also stuff like low libido, like libido struggles, having like lost desire in a long-term relationship, really common one. I just had a bit of a brain fart then. It happens.
It does.
People feeling as though it's not normal, or they're the only people that struggle to have an orgasm with a partner. So they might be able to have an orgasm with themselves, but then they really struggle to have an orgasm and like properly let go and surrender with a partner. Sure. Also just not being able to have an orgasm at all. Like, quite a lot of people are like, oh my God, like I know this is so weird, but I've never actually had an orgasm. And I'm like, oh, it's understandable given the culture we live in and your background and and the fact that you don't self-pleasure, Yeah. So also like a reliance on vibrators to come, really common. Not being able to feel much internally. So many people are like, yeah, I kind of self-pleasure, or like my part, like I have pleasure with my partner and stuff, but like when it comes to penetration or anything internal, I just don't really feel anything. Maybe I'm broken. And it's like, no, there's a reason for that. And it's not because you can't feel pleasure internally or have internal orgasms. It's for like these reasons that, you've kind of got. Yeah. So what else? There's so many. I'm just blanking right now on like
That's
some
okay.
really.
So know
ones.
that
But yeah,
if you're listening and you're struggling, that you're probably not the only woman. So, but
yeah,
finding
totally.
somebody who can support you through that help is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And just chatting, like I often just encourage clients to have more conversations about it. Like if they can have, find some friends or sister or something, even just like one other person. I mean, multiple ideally, but you'd be surprised how many people don't have anyone in their life that they like are comfortable to talk about sex with. Like that kind of blows my mind, because me and my friends, all we talk about is sex. But yeah, if you can just find other people to chat to about it, and also like reading things online, like Instagram or books, or, listening to podcasts like yours, like basically finding as many sex positive, body positive, progressive, like inputs, things to put into your brain. Super important. Like the conversations we have, the things we read and consume, anything we consume is going to be making or breaking like our relationship with sexuality and changing the way we see it. Mm-hmm. And we've spent our entire lives being taught and conditioned in one way, which is like not the way that's helpful around pleasure and empowerment. Mm-hmm. And then if you, like being conscious of what you're consuming to kind of, bolster up the other side of it, and help you have more sex positive and open-minded views of it, then you're going to be slowly dismantling all of that shame and the trauma and the conditioning. And so having conversations with friends will just make you realize, like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Like, they've got this issue and they've got, it just normalizes it and takes away the power of like the shame and the secretiveness,
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can our people find you? Where are you?
So Instagram is probably the best place. That's where I post the most content. I have a website as well. It's just freyagraf.com. But my Instagram is Freya_Graf_YMT. So YMT for Yoni mapping therapy. I'm sure you'll pop the links in the show notes and stuff. But yeah, Instagram's a good place. I'm pretty active over there, and I post a lot of like educational and usually pretty informative and like hopefully a bit funny content. So yeah, that's probably the best way. I've got like a YouTube channel with some videos and like a mailing list and stuff, but if you find me in one place, then you'll find me in the others anyway, if you follow the links. Yeah.
And we'll have her info down in the show notes as well. And I'll make sure I'll tag her on social media and things. But her page is so much fun. So I highly encourage you to go find her, follow her, learn. It will never be a dull moment. I love it. It's great.
Yay.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Make sure you all, like I said, connect with Freya, support her, I'm sure if you have questions, she'll probably be open to answering them, all those things. So
yeah, I love hearing from people. So just get in touch.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Madalyn. This has been a blast. Beautiful way to start my morning. And I really, really appreciate you and your work and what you're putting out in the world. It's just fucking fabulous. And I'm stoked we were able to collab and have a chat today.
Me too.